Good evening to you all and welcome to the lecture series on Law of Sea and Maritime Law. Today, this lecture will be in continuation with the previous lectures, and this is for week 2, lecture 2. In the last lecture, we were discussing about the dispute concerning border settlement between India and Bangladesh. So, what were the circumstances that need to be taken into consideration while deciding the dispute or while deciding the matters between India and Bangladesh with regard to territorial waters, with regard to the contiguous zone and other areas that are where both the parties do have the common interest, or we can say that there are parallel interests between the parties. Now, as per the United Nations Convention on Law of Sea 1982, goes by the general principle of equidistance rule, or it takes into consideration the midpoint between the water bodies. But in certain cases, it also consider the historical perspective, that is how historically the distance has been determined between the two states and how the water bodies, the influence on the water bodies or jurisdiction on the water bodies has been in continuation from the years even before the unique laws. So that unique laws take that into consideration also. And moreover, what is very essential to know here, they also take the special circumstances to deviate from these general principles that are like equidistance principle or midpoint principle, or even the historical usage or the historical practices. So the deviation goes in the case of India and Bangladesh dispute because of the special circumstances. Whether such circumstances exist in this case and implication of any special circumstances for the method of delimiting the boundary. Delimitation of exclusive economic zone and continental shelf within 200 nautical miles. So firstly, what was the India's contention, and then we go by the Bangladesh contention. I would like to recall that this dispute arose between India and Bangladesh after the creation of Bangladesh as an independent country. Earlier, there was no such border dispute when it was East Pakistan, because Pakistan was abiding by the boundary settlement done by the British people when they left India. So they never were so ambitious to settle the boundaries all across the coastal region on the side of the East Pakistan. But after Bangladesh came into existence, then they started claiming the rights based on the territorial waters, contiguous zone and exclusive economic zone. Now, they were definitely genuine in that regard, but the complexities were because they are too close to the Indian boundaries, and determining by the general principles of 12 nautical miles, then additional 12 nautical miles, and further when it extends finally to the extent of 200 nautical miles between the two adjacent states is very difficult. And then also when the India has a very large coastline and Bangladesh has a smaller coastline and a small nation, then how proportionally this arrangement can be made between the two states was very difficult. So in the light of that, the special circumstances methods was used. India argued for applying the equidistance relevant circumstances method, in which a provisional equidistance line is identified and then adjusted if relevant circumstances require. India emphasized here that the arbitral tribunal, they should go by the equidistance, that is the distance between India and Bangladesh. The baseline, now how the equidistance method is applied, where the baseline, Indian baseline and the Bangladesh baseline, they are taken into consideration and points are directed, or let's say the points are highlighted from the Indian side and the Bangladesh side, and then those points are, the perpendicular is drawn between those 2 points, and then it is decided that this can be the boundary between the 2 states. So India was asking for that method. Now, what actually happened? Let's see. Equidistance relevant circumstances method, in which provisional equidistance line is identified and then adjusted if relevant circumstances require. India considered, however, that no adjustment was necessary in the present case, because India was relying on the earlier decision given by the British people, or let's say the earlier settlement done by the British people. In contrast, Bangladesh argued that concavity of the Bay of Bengal and instability of the coast called for the application of angle bisector method. Under this approach, the overall direction of the parties' coast is first identified. Angle formed by these lines is then bisected to produce the boundary line. Now, let's give a look to the map, what it was stating. We take into consideration the map between India and Bangladesh. Now, you see here Bangladesh claimed that since the Bay of Bengal, you see here, it's a concave here. This intent is concave, and that cuts quite an area of Bangladesh. We take again this, it cuts quite a deep area from Bangladesh, and then this is all this area we see, it's not very stable, because during the course of the time the river changes their course, and sometime much of the land from the Bangladesh is taken, and sometime much of the land from the India is taken. Like here, this is Haribanga river, then there is a Raimangal river, and then we see that Haribanga sometime it will take much of the Bangladesh waters, Bangladesh region, and sometime it will take, like we draw it here. Let's say the Haribanga this year, it passes like this. So this means it has taken much of the Bangladesh side. It can be that the next year Haribanga river, it follow this path and it has taken the Indian side. So meaning thereby that we cannot say that this is a static measurement. Now, if we go by the equidistance method, then we need to draw it like this, and there from here we draw the midpoints to know the Bay of Bengal. So it is one way which was argued by India. But let's say the river has changed its course. It has taken again this point like this, and then much of the Indian water. So that means we draw the midline here. That means much of the area this time goes to the Bangladesh region. So that means there is no permanent settled border if we go by this method. So how that permanent settlement of the border can be determined, that was the main issue here. That no adjustment necessary in the present case. In contrast, Bangladesh argued that concavity of the Bay of Bengal and instability of the coast called the application of angle bisector method. So what Bangladesh emphasized, that we need to find out the area based on the angle bisector method, that is due to the concavity of the Bay of Bengal, and that much of area, extra area should be given to Bangladesh. Under this approach, the overall direction of the party's coast is first identified. Angle formed by these lines is then bisected to produce boundary line. Turning to the existence of relevant circumstances, the tribunal did not consider the instability of the coast of Bay of Bengal to be the relevant circumstances that would justify adjustment of provisional equidistance line. Now, I would like to discuss two things here. One is provisional equidistance line. Provisional equidistance line is drawn along the parties where the matter is still under adjudication, and parties have agreed that this can be the arrangement until unless the matter has been finally resolved. So that becomes the provisional equidistance line. And many times that provisional equidistance line becomes the final line of demarcation between the two states. But that may even differ in certain cases if the findings are different. Next is here the question of instability of the coast. Now, so far as the instability of the coast is concerned, that actually is true in the case of this India and Bangladesh dispute. But the reason is why this was not accepted by the tribunal, because when the British people, they decided the matter or when they drew the boundary, at that time, whatever the coastline they decided finally, that remained for a certain period of time, although it changed later on. So it can be that today the tribunal decide that this can be the final coastline or this can be the final baseline depending upon the movement of the water, and next again after 5 years it has changed. So that will always be the dispute in process. So in order to avoid this practice by the nations, that means once it has been decided that this becomes the final baseline depending upon the water bodies or the movement of the water bodies, so that remains as a practice, that remains in practice for years and years to come, and it cannot be changed so easily by making claims that this time the passage of river has changed, or this time the passage of water body has changed, and now we should determine another baseline for that period. So that is the reason. But if we go by the fact of the matter, then the claim made by Bangladesh that there is an instability of the coast cannot be declined. The tribunal emphasized that what matters is the coastline at the time of delimitation. So that means when the delimitation was made between India and Pakistan, at that time all these factors were taken into consideration, and it was emphasized, or it was reasoned, that what we see today, the position of the river meeting the sea, we consider that this will be the final point of decision for demarcation between India and Pakistan. So that need to be continued for a very long period of time until unless there is a very vital change. Delimitation and that future changes in coast cannot alter the maritime boundary. The tribunal concluded, however, that concavity of the Bay of Bengal was a relevant circumstances and that as a result of such concavity, the provisional equidistance line produced a cut-off effect on the seaward projections of the coast of Bangladesh. The tribunal considered that the cutoff required an adjustment to the provisional equidistance line in order to produce equidistance result. So what is basically the reason here? That because of the concavity of the Bay of Bengal, the movement of the ship or the movement of any such ship or the trawlers, that gets affected. Why it gets affected? Let's see here. I just show you again here. Let's take this map into consideration again. Now this is the Bay of Bengal and this is what we mean by concavity. We see here, this is the concavity on this side and this is India. So if let's say the ship from India wants closer to this place. So, and then there is a Bangladesh ship that wants closer to this place. So how that we define the area of India and that of the Bangladesh, that becomes problematic. And then in between, it's not simply the water passage. There are small islands. Now some islands that belongs to India and for some islands it is the claim of the Bangladesh. And here then there is a Myanmar also that borders this area if we see. So Myanmar also has its claim in this concave area. So there are 3 concave areas. Now what is the solution for this? That if we go by the 12 nautical mile area, that means the Bangladesh will cover all this area. And since there is an interception by the Indian waters, then the Bangladesh cannot take the entire 12 nautical miles. How it will be decided? The area that is now overlapped by the India's claim, that will be compensated by the vertical projection. Vertical projection means a line drawn from this point dividing the India's claim and dividing the Bangladesh claim. Let's see, like if this is the line drawn, so let's say in the normal circumstances, Bangladesh claims remains up till this point. That means 12 nautical miles plus another 12 nautical miles and then 200 nautical miles remain up till this. So the additional area which Bangladesh actually is a rightful claimant here, that will be compensated by the angle bisector method here. So this will be drawn here, the extent of angle that it has lost, that will be compensated by this much of area. So that is what the claim was made. But the problem was because of this concavity, and then simply not concavity, but then there are claims by the India all across here and the parallel claims also made by the Myanmar. The tribunal emphasized that what matters is the coastline at the time of delimitation and that future changes in the coast cannot alter the maritime boundary. The tribunal concluded, however, that the concavity of the Bay of Bengal was relevant circumstances and that as a result of such concavity, the provisional equidistance line produced a cut-off effect on the seaward projections of the coast of Bangladesh. The tribunal considered that cutoff required an adjustment to the provisional equidistance line in order to produce equitable result. Now the word equitable result means that Bangladesh should not feel deprived of those rights for the movement of the ship or the use of the sea resources. Otherwise, since there are other states also claiming across the same water, so that equitable result, the Bangladesh will be compensated across the vertical projections. Then is delimitation of the continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles. Having adopted equidistance relevant circumstances method for the delimitation of continental shelf within 200 nautical miles, the tribunal used the same method to delimit the continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles. So the continental shelf area is the area down the sea waters and it remains extended up till the first bend of the land mass that is beneath the water. So that is what we mean by continental shelf. I'll just show the map again of continental shelf area. Now we see here, this is the baseline and from baseline onwards, we see first is the territorial waters and then is the contiguous zone and this is exclusive economic zone and this is the first bend. So here we determine the continental shelf, the point of the outer, you see here limits of the continental shelf. So this is the first continental shelf and this is the foot of continental shelf. And the claim of the parties remain up till here if it is 200 nautical miles. It can be even beyond 200 nautical miles, but 200 nautical miles is the standard measurement here. There is another map for continental shelf area. Let's see that also. Yes, this is the continental shelf area, the first bent. After that is continental slope and then is continental rise. Having adopted the equidistance relevant circumstances method for the delimitation of continental shelf within 200 nautical miles. Now this 200 nautical miles was not possible for the Bangladesh to measure because there was a parallel claims by the India also all across the same area and then also of the Myanmar. The tribunal used the same method, the continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles. Having decided that the concavity of the Bay of Bengal required adjustment of provisional equidistance line within 200 nautical miles, the tribunal was also of the view that an adjustment was required beyond 200 nautical miles. 200 nautical miles means when we talk about its a vertical claim and then it extended, the tribunal was of the view that an adjustment was required beyond 200 nautical miles. I'll show you the map later for this also. Disproportionality test. The parties agreed that the final step in delimitation line does not yield disproportionate result. The test compares the ratio of the relevant maritime space accorded to each party to the ratio of the length of parties' coast. Now, it's not simply the claims with regard to the continental shelf and then the territorial waters, that how can be determined when there is on one side India with such a bigger coastline and then on the other side is Bangladesh with the smaller coastline. So that has to be the proportionality position has to be taken into consideration. Then only it's possible. I mean to say, let's say across the same water body or the concavity point, the claims were made by Bangladesh also and the claims were made by the India also. Now, who will get the larger share? That is the point here, whether India or Bangladesh. It is not the question of India asserting, but it is basically the fact that India has a larger coastline. So based on that larger coastline, India's proportionate claim will be higher than that of the Bangladesh, and that is what the tribunal take into this notice. And parties agreed to that. The parties agreed that the final step in delimitation line does not yield a disproportionate result. The test compares the ratio of the relevant maritime space accorded to each party to the ratio of the length of the party's coast. The tribunal evaluated the maritime areas that would be allocated to each party by its adjusted delimitation line. Grey area. The tribunal noted that the delimitation line it has adopted give rise to an area that lies beyond 200 nautical miles from the coast of Bangladesh and within 200 miles from the coast of India, and yet lies to the east of tribunal's delimitation line. Within this grey area, the tribunal noted Bangladesh has a potential entitlement with respect to the continental shelf, but not an exclusive economic zone, while India is potentially entitled to both the zones. So that means the use of continental shelf area beyond 200 nautical miles between India and Bangladesh, that was based on an adjustment, mutual adjustment between the parties. Accordingly, the tribunal decided that within the grey area, the boundary line delimits only the parties' sovereign rights concerning the continental shelf and does not otherwise limits India's sovereign right to the exclusive economic zone in the superjacent waters. So like if this is the continental shelf area and these are the superjacent waters. So India does have the sovereign right over the use of exclusive economic zone, that is EEZ. But with regard to this continental shelf area, so here this is like the India's exclusive right all across this water. That means whatever is available here, India does have exclusive claim. But with regard to this continental shelf area, they both the parties, that is both India and Bangladesh, does have the claims, and those claims are settled between the parties based on the mutual agreements. Next is the similar such question or even more complex question that arose between the maritime boundary dispute between India and Sri Lanka. So let's see how that was resolved. Here firstly, let's see in the last lecture I stated that all this across between the India and Sri Lanka there are coral reefs. So you can see here that these are the dense coral reef areas, and one passage that is for the movement of ship is through this Park State area. But then this Park State area is a little bit challenging. The other way out is that the ships they move all across the Sri Lanka and then they take the route from Indian Ocean to the Bay of Bengal. So that is another route. And the one is instead of Going deep into the Indian Ocean side, they cover the Park Strait and then they reach the Bay of Bengal. So this is where the red line mark is shown. But the bigger ships or the frequent movement of the ships here is risky because there are the coral reefs and also there is a stretch of land, Dhanush Kodi and all this area. So that restrains the movement of ships all across here. You can see this is the point how the India does have its exclusive economic zone, the other extension of the sovereign rights towards the territorial waters and then towards the contiguous zone that can be seen here in this map. Now, one more thing I would like to show that the territorial waters up and exclusive economic zone for the main coastline India is extended up till here. Now, here you will see between India and Sri Lanka, it has gone narrow. Why it is narrow? Because it is based on the mutual agreement between the parties, between India and Sri Lanka. So both the states need to share the resources of the sea, and both the states are quite close to each other, and there is a very narrow water body dividing the two countries. So therefore, we cannot go by the strict measurement of 12 nautical miles, then again 12 nautical miles, and then all together up till 200 nautical miles for determining the exclusive economic zone area. So here you will find that these margins are quite narrow across this Park Strait area. And one more thing is here the Andaman Nicobar Islands, they have different, another territorial waters and the contiguous zone because they are quite far from the mainland India, but although they are the part of India. Had they been closer to the India, then the territorial waters all across that would have passed these islands. So since they are quite far away from the mainland, therefore the separate territorial waters and exclusive economic zone have been constructed here. Now with regard to India and Sri Lanka dispute, which is very important, and the decision, very wonderful thing is that both the parties have agreed to settle the dispute amicably. India-Lanka relations run back to the prehistoric times. The narrow strip of ocean between the two countries known as Park Strait has been crucial factor in determining the relation between them. The Park Strait is named after Robert Park. So how this dispute was resolved? So how the Park Strait got its name? Park Strait is named after Robert Park, governor of Madras Presidency from 1755 to 1763. Narrower than the English Channel, it separates the northern coast of Sri Lanka from the south coast of India. The maritime boundary between Sri Lanka and India is divided at three different sea areas: Bay of Bengal in the north, Park Strait in the middle, and Gulf of Mannar in the south. So how it is? Let's see in the map again. So it is Park Strait, then south is Gulf of Mannar, and this goes to the Bay of Bengal. So that is how the division between India and Sri Lanka through water bodies is related. The average distance between Sri Lanka and India through Park Strait is about 32 kilometers. So if we go by the calculations of 12 nautical miles, 1 nautical mile is 1.8 something of 1.8 kilometers. So it's normal than the kilometer margin. So here it is about 32 kilometers. So that means we cannot take the 12 nautical miles, then another 12 nautical miles of contiguous zone, and then further the exclusive economic zone. Both countries have signed bilateral agreements on a maritime boundary as per the UNICLOS, that is the UNICLOS. Even India and Sri Lanka, they were negotiating prior to the formation of the present UNICLOS, that is UNICLOS 1982. You can see here, this is Gulf of Mannar and this is Park Strait area, and you can see this goes quite closer to the small islands that follow the route to the Sri Lanka, and this is the Bay of Bengal. So how we can state that the 12 nautical miles plus 12 nautical miles that Sri Lanka gets freely all across this portion can be even extended to with the same level of freedom to this portion. So neither can India get the same 12 nautical miles plus 12 nautical miles. That is the general principle of UNICLOS. So there has to be mutual agreement between the parties that they will narrow down their claims to this point, and then further they will again stretch their claims where there is a free sea area. Sri Lanka has exercised maritime jurisdiction over its ports and the adjoining sea with regard to access of ships to ports, long before the concept of territorial water began to be operational in international law arena. So the claims that Sri Lanka is, this case is an example where the cannon gun rule was adopted. That is, the 3 nautical mile gun rule was adopted. That is quite long back when the UNICLOS came into existence. So Sri Lanka is one country where accepted the earlier position of international practices, that is based on 3 nautical miles. So they were going by that long before the concept of territorial waters began to be operational in international law arena. In 1702, during the Dutch colonial times, Sri Lanka maintained 3 mile territorial sea which is within the reach of cannon shot. On 4th September 1918, authorities of Madras proposed to the government of India, then ruled by the British, that existing 3 mile limit of Indian territorial waters should be extended to 12 miles for safeguarding their fisheries. Now, so when it came under the British occupation, mainly the India, they started extending their claims because one was the global practice that has changed from 3 nautical miles to the 12 nautical miles, and then the advantages of extending, that is, more of the resources can be used, the sea resources can be used by the British people who were in India, and then they can get more higher revenue. So they wanted to extend the 3 nautical miles up to the 12 nautical miles for both for their own economic interest and also with the changes made in the international law practices. And this was initiated by the authorities stationed in Madras, so they wanted to make changes. The Madras authorities also suggested that Gulf of Mannar and Pak state should be declared mere classum, that is the open waters where both the state do have the equal claim. So neither the India will make its exclusive claim, neither Sri Lanka can make its exclusive claim. And that the water should be delimited between India and Sri Lanka. The British authority who ruled India at that time considered the respective water as an integral part of His Majesty's domain in any case. So the British people, they were not ready to accept those waters as the free body between India and Sri Lanka. Rather, they were asserting that these are the king's claim. That means the British monarchs, they have the right over that waters. The Undersecretary of the State was informed by Foreign Office that the proposed delimitation of the area was acceptable to Whitehall, but not the proposed declared mere classum. So they were ready to change from 3 nautical miles to 12 nautical miles, but they were not ready to declare that the free passage between India and Sri Lanka. In the same year, the Madras authorities suggested to Sri Lankan government to hold a conference in order to discuss the issue of delimiting maritime boundaries between the two countries. There was some public interest on the issue and several newspapers carried articles on the issue. So how the matter could be resolved? That means both the parties need to sit together and decide how they will resolve the disputes. So thank you for being with us, and I thank you very much for giving your time, and we further continue with the lecture on the delimitation of boundaries between India and Sri Lanka. Thank you very much.